We slowed the car down to make sure we had not made a turn off that road, and we were certain we were probably headed for Paul's farmhouse. And we were convinced we were on the right road, but as we sat there, the back end of the car kind of sank down in the ruts in the road, and we were stuck.
Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. It's an honor again to have with us radio legend Roger W. Morgan, and thanks for being on again.
Hey, the honor is all mine, Josh. I'm happy to be back with you.
Cool. Now, last time you told me the first question I need to ask you was about your encounter with Paul McCartney in Scotland on a hillside.
Oh, boy. We get right into the meatiest story of all. If I ever write a book, this is the one that will take it to the big screen. In 1969, Josh, you will know about this already because you're the kind of guy who would have researched this well. There was a rumor that Paul McCartney may have died and that he had been replaced by a stand-in. And there were several theories on how this might have all taken place, but as it turned out, it was merely the result of some people working on a college course to create a story with an ending, but to explain the ending of the story in a term paper. And if my explanation is incorrect, and I have gotten the wrong explanation from the people most likely to have the correct one, and that would be Paul McCartney and the rest of the Beatles, and Derek Taylor, their press secretary at the time of the incident. So I was on the air in Omaha, Nebraska, doing the morning show, and this rumor spread quickly among young people particularly. Paul McCartney was dead, they thought, or could be, so they called the radio station. Roger, what are we going to do? Well, I realized that the story was highly unlikely, but it was good for attracting a great radio audience. So I kept the conversations going on the air. We're really a music-intensive radio station, but they would call in and ask for a request and say to me, what are you doing about the story about Paul McCartney? And I would respond, look, we're checking into it. We'll have information for you as quickly as we can get it. As it turned out, the calls got more heated and frustrating as that show went along. And so I began to devote the entire program to talking about the rumor and how we were investigating whether or not it was true. By the end of my 4-hour program, I had completely drifted away from the all-music format that was absolutely mandatory. And I'd gotten into this conversation that I knew was good for the radio station because my audience I knew was growing rapidly. And I said, maybe the only thing for me to do is to take the phone and call to Apple Records and see if I could schedule an appointment with Paul McCartney. Just see what they say. And the people said, good, what a perfect solution. Do it, Roger. And so I did. I got a call placed to Apple Records in London. I spoke to a charming young woman who answered the phone. And I told her who I was, and I said I'd like to make an appointment with Paul McCartney. She said, well, unfortunately, Paul is not here at the moment, but maybe I could help you. And I said, no, I really need to speak to him personally. If I were there, could I make an appointment? She said, well, yes, we could probably schedule an appointment, but he's not going to be back right away. I said, well, how about next week? Think we could get a brief appointment with him? And she said, would you like for me to schedule an appointment for you? And I said, yes, let's do it. She said, okay, how about next Wednesday at 4 p.m. or whatever time she said. I think it was actually in the morning. I said, that'll work. Put me on the list of people with appointments. And she thanked me, and that was the end of that. And that was the end of my program that day. But people were calling the station saying, that was absolutely brilliant. Roger's going to go to London. He's going to interview the Beatles. He'll come back with the true story. There was a note waiting for me at the front desk, and it was the receptionist had said, Mr. Burden, that was Don W. Burden, the owner of Star Stations, whose office was directly above our studio, wants to see you immediately in his office. I said, well, that's curtains for me, but it was a great going out show. If I was going to go out, I want to go out with a flash, and this was it. I went up to his office, and I walked through the door, and his opening line was, congratulations. Your passport will be waiting for you in Chicago. I've already made the airline reservations. And get on that plane and get that story. Oh, my gosh, Josh. Greatest opportunity of not just my radio career, but at that point, perhaps my life. I'm going to go to London, travel free of charge with the blessings of a guy who could have fired me for breaking the format as radically as I had broken it, Josh. So I got on the plane, flew to Chicago, where I picked up the passport that was waiting for me. That was expedited. This is in 1969. That got expedited in a matter of hours rather than days. And I had the passport, flew to England, got off the plane in London, asked to be taken to the hotel where the reservation was already made for me. And the cabbie said, you are from America, and I told him the story. And he said, well, when is your appointment? I said, Wednesday at whatever time it was. And he said, do you realize that today is Wednesday and we've only got about 2 hours to get you there? I said, oh, I didn't realize. He said, you're here in time, no problem, but you don't have time to go to the hotel. We're headed for Apple Records. So we got there, and I walked into the office at Apple Records, and there were, I wish I could describe it better, but it's a rather small office on, I believe it's on Savile Row, but I could be mistaken. But I walked upstairs. There's a set of stairs walking up, and I walked up, and there were several people in the lobby that were waiting, and the receptionist was sitting at her desk sort of talking to them, people with appointments, business people who were there to meet with someone at Apple Records. And she finally turned to me and said, can I help you? And I didn't want to talk across the room, so I stepped up very close to her desk so as not to alert other people that I was there to meet with Paul McCartney. And I said, I'm Roger Morgan from Omaha, Nebraska. I think you've got me on the list. She said, what list? I said, the list to meet with Paul McCartney. And she said, Paul McCartney's not here. I said, well, wait a minute. I made an appointment. She said, who'd you make the appointment with? I said, I made the appointment with the lady who answered the phone. She sounded kind of like you, as a matter of fact. And this girl said, oh, my God, you're the disc jockey from Nebraska? I said, yeah. She said, I thought we were kind of doing a radio bit here. And I wanted to play along. I did not want to embarrass you, and I wanted to help you out with what I thought was probably a fun show for you. So I made the appointment, but he's not here. He's in Scotland. And I said, this presents a serious problem for me. Well, Josh, I'll jump to the next part of this story, which is pretty darn good. She said, I'll take you up to Derek Taylor's office. He's a press secretary. Derek will let you interview him, and he'll answer your questions, and you'll get everything you need. I said, boy, this is not going to satisfy why I'm here, and this is not going to be the story I want to take back to Omaha. I got to Derek Taylor's office upstairs in a room about half the size of a basketball court, big room, and I sat at this big table, and Derek Taylor came in as a kind guy, great guy. And he said, Roger, I understand you're here to talk about the rumor about Paul McCartney. And I said, yes. And I thought I had an appointment, but I don't have the appointment. He said, well, let's not worry about that. And he said, maybe I can answer your questions. And we began to talk about it. And I said, really, I've got to get more than just an interview with you to satisfy why I'm here, because the guy who owns the company that sent me here is not going to like this at all. He's a tough guy. He said, who is he? I said, I'm with Kissin, K-I-S-N, in Portland, Oregon. And Derek Taylor said, the home of Paul Revere and the Raiders. I said, well, not exactly the home, but they do perform there often. And I was shocked that Derek Taylor would know anything at all about Portland, Oregon, or Paul Revere and the Raiders. I said, you know about Paul Revere and the Raiders? He said, oh, I not only know about Paul Revere and the Raiders, I know about the owner of your radio station, Don Burden, maybe the toughest guy I've ever encountered in my career. And I'm thinking to myself, this is either going to be a great closing to this deal or this is going to be horrible. I said, how do you know about Paul Revere and the Raiders and Don Burden at Star Stations? He said, I used to be the press secretary for Paul Revere and the Raiders in the States. And I had an encounter with Don Burden, and he said, you're right. This guy will kill us all. We got to see if we can schedule an appointment. But he said, you're not going to be able to meet him here. He's in Scotland. Maybe we can get you there. But he said, I don't know that we could actually get that done. And he said, I'm going to go check and see what I can find out. And so he said, if you want to go downstairs and wait in the lobby, you can go downstairs. And he said, I believe I can arrange for you to maybe fly to Scotland. I didn't know how I was going to get there. So as I exited that big basketball-sized courtroom, I made my way down the stairway, and a guy was coming up the stairway, and he was out of breath, and he said, is Paul McCartney up there? And I said, no, he's not up there. And he said, well, I had planned to meet with him today or somebody to talk about this rumor that Paul McCartney is dead. And I said, that's why I'm here. He introduced himself. He's Mark, and he's from the London Financial Times newspaper. And he said, I know Paul personally. I said, you do? He said, yep. And as he said, a matter of fact, I know where he lives in Scotland. And he said, if he's in Scotland, if they told you that, I know exactly where he lives. We have to cut to the chase because this story goes on, but it's got a good ending. This guy, and I said to him, I can get the money to fly to Scotland if you can tell me where he is. I called back to Omaha. I said, you're going to have to clear airline tickets for me to fly to Scotland, but I'm flying to Scotland to meet with Paul McCartney. And they wired the money to me. And this guy, Mark, agreed to go with me. We had tickets for he and I to fly to Scotland. And we got on the plane, and we got there, and we rented a car, a Jaguar, and we're going to drive to where Paul is in Scotland. And we drove, and it was a stormy drive, rain coming down like crazy. And we get to this little town in Scotland, and I had some instructions that were given to me by this guy, Mark, about how to get up to where Paul lived. And you had to pass through a big gate, and we were warned, if you go through this gate, there's a guy by the name of Trupshoot who is at the entrance to that gate, and he's going to try to stop you. He's got dogs. Don't stop for him. Just keep driving, because the guy's job is to stop people from going up that road. Don't stop for him, even if he waves his arms or dogs come after you. Just keep rolling. And we did. And, Josh, we got as far up that road as we felt we could drive, and it was raining like crazy, and we slowed the car down to make sure we had not made a curve or turn off that road, and we were certain we were probably headed for Paul's farmhouse up on the mountain. And we were convinced we were on the right road, but as we sat there, the back end of the car kind of sank down in the ruts in the road, and we were stuck. And so we just kind of pulled it as gently as we could out of the roadway and parked it to the side of the road and said, we can't be far based upon the information we have. We'll walk the rest of the way, which turned out to be about 1.5 miles, quite a ways up the road. We got to what we knew was probably Paul's place. It was surrounded with a rock, just kind of a rock wall, and a cabin that would not be the kind of place you'd expect Paul McCartney to be, and a barn associated with that property. And I grabbed my tape recorder when we had started the walk up the hill and tucked it under my jacket. And it was one of those little Norelco recorders with a long microphone cord on it. So we get to the rock wall, and I said, well, should we just jump over and go knock on the door? What do you think we should do? You know him. And he said, I think we should just duck down here behind the wall and observe for a while. Keep in mind, Josh, the rain is coming down like crazy. We're freezing stiff. And this guy who knows Paul McCartney is saying, no, we'll duck down behind the wall. And as we ducked down behind that wall, a little girl walked out onto the porch, and Mark says, that's it. That's Linda's daughter, and that's Heather. And I said, I yelled, is your daddy home? And this little girl yelled to us to go away. And as I said to Mark, I think we should go ahead and just climb over the fence. And then Linda came out on the porch. We knew we were in the right place. Linda says, you guys are going to have to leave immediately. She's yelling at us, and she's very uncomfortable with the fact that we're there. And at the time, all I could think of was, geez, I hope she invites us in and we get out of the rain at least. And she just tells us in no uncertain terms, you got to leave. As that was happening, I look over at the barn, and out of the barn walks Paul McCartney. And Paul yells, piss off. I'd never heard that term used before to tell an intruder to leave. Those were the words that he spoke. Piss off. And I yelled. At that point, I almost felt like he and I were kin. I had such a intense relationship getting there. I said, Paul, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I just want to talk to you for a little bit. And he turned and walked into the barn, at which point I said to Mark, the guy who's ducking down behind the wall, Mark, why didn't you raise up and yell, hey, it's Mark from the London Financial Times?
This is the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs. We're speaking with Roger W. Morgan and his journey to try to interview Paul McCartney. And next time, we'll find out what Mark said to Roger after that question.